Last week, I came to you with the story of the French crown jewels recently stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris. All 8 pieces included diamonds. Lots and lots of diamonds, most of which probably came from India, and many of which were once part of the jewel collection of France's King Louis XIV. So diving into the world of Louis XIV's Indian diamond collection led me directly to a stone that I failed to mention last week, a stone that is quite possibly the most famous diamond in the world, the Hope Diamond. The story of the Hope Diamond is convoluted. It changed hands many times, stolen on several occasions, and was gradually cut down from 112 carats to just 45.5 today. Known for its rich blue color and red phosphorescence, the Hope Diamond is extremely rare and highly coveted. But a big part of the reason the Hope Diamond is so well known is not because it's pretty and sparkly. It's because it has a rather dark past. In fact, when you follow the story of the Hope Diamond back through its many owners, you may begin to notice a trail of destruction and tragedy left in its wake. For many, the tragic demise of many of the diamond's former owners is even proof of a curse. This infamy is a big part of what makes the Hope Diamond the most famous diamond in the world, with an estimated value of between $200 and $350 million. But is any of it true, or is it all a publicity stunt? Let's fix that. Hello, I'm Shayla Fontaine, and this is History Fix, where I discuss surprising true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. 2 weeks ago, I came to you with the story of a cursed ship, the Mary Celeste, and last week we talked about stolen French jewels. So it only made sense that we should follow up with the story of a potentially cursed stolen French jewel, right? The Hope Diamond. The Hope Diamond currently lives at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. I actually saw it there myself some years ago. I think I was in middle school or something. It's all I really remember from that trip to the museum, the Hope Diamond and the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, which are at the American History Museum there. I was 13, so that's all I really cared about. And then the American History Museum, though, also has Mr. Rogers' sweater. I was into that too. Anyway, off topic. That's where the Hope Diamond is now. It's in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian Museum there. But the story of how it got there is quite an epic tale, dotted, in fact, with so much tragedy that it has led to legends about a curse. Here's the thing, though. When I dig into the history of the diamond, it becomes immediately apparent that a lot of the tales of misfortune told about it aren't actually true. Or they're taken out of context, or they might even be true, but there's just nothing really to back it up. It's just something someone said one time. But why would they say it? Why would they say that if it wasn't true? Why would anyone want to fabricate a cursed diamond? What's the motive there? Well, notoriety, infamy, intrigue, these do a whole lot for the monetary value of something like a diamond. Humans are weird. Give something a juicy backstory, and you can charge twice as much for it. So today I want to find out, how true is the legend of the cursed Hope Diamond? Let's try to find the truth in it. The diamond's first official owner was France's King Louis XIV. Louis was an exceedingly lavish guy, we'll put it that way. He was also known as Louis the Great and Louis the Sun King. He chose the sun as the symbol of his reign because he believed in the absolute power of the monarchy and that he had a divine right to rule. So the ego is strong with this one. Louis is perhaps best known for building the Palace of Versailles, which is this over-the-top gilded palatial estate. And he was also known to have a pretty solid jewel collection. Louis was into anything that showed off his grandeur, his opulence, and extreme wealth and superiority as the almighty Sun King. So Louis ruled France from 1643 until 1715. So this was a time when it was still socially acceptable to use tax money that was supposed to go to feeding poor people and use it to just cover yourself in precious gems inside your gilded palace. So that was Louis XIV. He loved gems so much that he had his own guy whose job it was to go find him the most beautiful gems in the world. This guy's name was Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. He was a French gem merchant who made, we think, about 5 trips to India between 1640 and 1667. India was the hot spot for diamonds at the time. This is where all the European royal families went to get their diamonds that were then incorporated into their crown jewels. For example, the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which adorns the Queen Mother's crown as part of the British crown jewels and is the most valuable diamond in the world, that came from India. Actually, India wants that back, too. It's pretty controversial. Anyway, these diamonds were coming from diamond mines in India, and that is where Tavernier got what will become the Hope Diamond. Now, there are all kinds of legends about how he actually acquired it. He most likely purchased it from these Indian diamond mines, but according to the legends, he stole it. The legend goes that Tavernier stole the diamond off of a Hindu statue of the goddess Sita. It was one of the eyes on the statue. Now, this legend doesn't actually arise until something like 300 years later in an 1888 newspaper article from New Zealand. So that's never a good sign when you're seeking the truth, a 300-year gap. But also the other eye of the statue, which would be a similarly rare and gigantic blue diamond, I assume. You'd want the eyes to match. That diamond has never surfaced. There is no other diamond like this that we know of. There are also legends that at some point after acquiring the diamond, Tavernier was attacked and killed by a pack of wild dogs in Constantinople. But as we actually know that he lived to be 84 years old. He lived to the ripe old age of 84, which is crazily old for the 1600s, 1700s. So the pack of wild dogs legend is almost certainly not true. But we do know that Tavernier got the diamond in India sometime in the mid-1600s and presented it to King Louis XIV, along with some other diamonds as well. The original diamond was around 112 carats, which is ginormous, and it was uncut. It was in its raw form. So people in India were more into the size of the diamond. They just wanted it to be as big as possible. In France, they were more into the cut and the luster. They wanted it shapely and sparkly. So Louis gets the diamond that Tavernier got in India, and he has it cut and shaped in a process that took 2 years. And this process of cutting and shaping the diamond brought the diamond down from 112 carats to just 69 carats. Because of its blue color, it was called the Blue Diamond of the Crown of France, according to contemporary inventories where it's listed. Now, colloquially, it was called the French Blue. So well before it was the Hope Diamond, it was the French Blue. Louis had it set in gold, and it hung on a ribbon around his neck during ceremonies. He's not wearing it daily. It's super special. It's reserved for these important ceremonies. So what became of Louis XIV, original owner of the diamond? Did the curse claim its first victim? Some say so. He eventually died of gangrene, which is when your tissue dies and basically rots while it's still on your body. It's pretty gross. So he got gangrene in his leg, probably caused by diabetes. So gangrene can happen due to an infection or because of a lack of blood supply. In Louis's case, if it was diabetes related, the gangrene would have been caused by poor circulation, a lack of blood. Nowadays, he would have the leg amputated. But back then, in the early 1700s, a leg amputation wasn't life-saving. It was just as much of a death sentence as the gangrene itself. And so Louis died a somewhat slow and painful death as his flesh rotted away and spread infection to the rest of his body, eventually resulting in organ failure. Not pretty. But is it a curse? Well, we have to also consider that Louis had a long and very prosperous reign and that he lived to the age of 76, which was quite old for 1715 when he died. Y'all, the life expectancy in France in the early 1700s, because I looked it up, of course, was like 25 years old. Crazy. So 76, he tripled that. He tripled the life expectancy of the time. Not a great way to go, but did pretty awesome otherwise as far as lives go. The crown goes next to Louis's 5-year-old at the time great-grandson, who becomes Louis XV. Louis XIV had outlived both his son and grandson, which meant that he left the crown to his great-grandson upon his death. Not sounding very cursed to me. I got to live a long time, got to be king for a long time. So Louis XV had the French blue diamond reset into a more elaborate piece. Remember, Louis XIV just wore it on a ribbon around his neck sometimes. Louis XV turns it into this pendant thing called the Order of the Golden Fleece. It has this red stone shaped like a dragon, breathing flames on the diamond, and it has other diamonds and stones around it too. It's kind of nuts. You're seeing it right now if you're watching the video version of this on YouTube or Patreon. So after this alteration to the diamond, after Louis XV alters this diamond, people point out that bad things start to happen. And people, of course, attribute this to the curse. So soon after, the 7 Years' War between France and Great Britain broke out. Louis was also attacked and stabbed by a would-be assassin, but survived in 1757. He eventually died of smallpox in 1774 at the age of 64. So people go, he had the diamond reset into this Order of the Fleece thing, and then there was a war, someone stabbed him, and then 20 more years of successfully being king later, he died a terrible but incredibly common death at an age that more than doubled the then life expectancy. It must have been the curse. But do you see how the context matters for all that? War, assassination attempt, smallpox, terrible, curse for sure, right? But then again, he survived the war. He survived the assassination attempt. He lived to a ripe old age and died of a predictable cause in his lavish kingly bedroom. Maybe not as cursed after all. The French blue diamond still set in the Order of the Golden Fleece pendant passed then to Louis XV's grandson, who inherited the throne next. You know this guy, our old buddy, Louis XVI of French Revolution guillotine fame. Louis XVI ruled France from 1774 until 1792, when they officially kicked him off the throne. He was executed in 1793, followed soon after by his wife, equally as infamous, Marie Antoinette. Check out episodes 90 and 91 about the French Revolution for more on all that. Now, they obviously met a terrible fate, right? Kicked off the throne, heads chopped off. It doesn't get much worse than that. Cursed? Maybe. People also look at the fate of one of Marie Antoinette's best friends, Marie-Louise, Princess of Lamballe, who was brutally killed during the Revolution and basically ripped to shreds and paraded through the streets outside of Marie Antoinette's window. Horrifying story. And people say, Marie Antoinette let this woman, her friend, she let her wear the French blue diamond, the Order of the Golden Fleece pendant. She wore it all the time. The curse got her too. I saw that multiple times while researching this. But no, I don't think she did. Marie Antoinette never even wore the Order of the Golden Fleece pendant that we know of. Marie Antoinette was known for repurposing old crown jewels into new pieces for personal adornment. She had an extensive jewelry collection made out of all these repurposed crown jewels, but she never touched the Order of the Golden Fleece. It remained intact and was not reset or repurposed. Plus, historical records indicate that it was reserved exclusively for the king, which means that neither Marie would have worn it. During the Revolution, the palaces were raided and looted, and at some point, the Order of the Golden Fleece pendant containing the French blue diamond was stolen by someone. Many of the other stones in the pendant were recovered soon after, but not the French blue. It disappeared entirely for a couple of decades. The diamond eventually resurfaced in London in 1812, but it was almost unrecognizable. It had been cut into a much smaller stone. The piece in London, in the collection of a diamond merchant named Daniel Eliasson, it was only 45 carats instead of 69. And it had been badly cut. Jewelers say that, whoever cut it butchered the job because they made it way smaller, first of all, but also the way that they cut it reduced its luster, which matters with diamonds. But this thing was stolen. They had to cut it. They had to disguise it so that France didn't just immediately reclaim it. And we weren't even really sure if this stone that appeared in London was the same stone as the French blue until recently, actually. According to Wikipedia, quote, "It was long believed that the Hope diamond was cut from the French blue, but confirmation came when a three-dimensional leaden model of the latter was rediscovered in the archives of the Paris National Museum of Natural History in 2005. Previously, the dimensions of the French blue had been known only from two drawings made in 1749 and 1789, although the model differs slightly from the drawings in some details. These details are identical to the features of the Hope diamond, allowing CAD technology to digitally reconstruct the French blue around the recut stone." End quote. I love how they're always discovering things in archives. It's so crazy to me that there's just these rooms full of filing cabinets with stuff in them that no one really knows what's in there, and we just might discover something we didn't know existed or thought was long lost. Crazy. So the stone turns back up in the collection of this diamond merchant, Daniel Eliasson, around 20 years later, which also just so happens to be when the statute of limitations ran out. So France can't even do anything about it now, right? Weren't sure if it was the same stone. Pretty sure it was. Still can't do anything about it. So what happens to it next? We think it might have been owned, actually, by Great Britain's King George IV for a minute. There aren't great records to back that up, but according to the Smithsonian, there are, quote, several references that he did. So he wasn't flaunting it, obviously, because it's not well documented. There aren't a lot of witness reports that he had it or anything like that, but he might have had it. We know that the stone didn't stay in the British royal family, though, because they don't still own it today, and we know that George IV had massive debts when he died. So we can assume that the diamond, if he ever owned it, was probably sold to cover those debts after his death. In case you're wondering, George IV died at the age of 67 of honestly just overindulgence, eating and drinking way too much. He was just super overweight and unhealthy. Not a very curse-like death. Dude just ate exquisite food and guzzled wine to his heart's content his whole life, and still managed to near double the then life expectancy. As for the jeweler Daniel Eliasson, I don't know how he died, but I know that he was 71 and that he was married to his sister. Unrelated, but weird enough to mention. Nothing crazy curse-like seemed to have befallen Eliasson. If George ever even owned the diamond, it was likely sold off to pay his debts. It eventually resurfaces in 1839, still in London, published in a gem collection catalog. Now the stone is owned by a guy named Henry Philip Hope, who's part of a wealthy banking family. Hope died, though, almost immediately after the diamond was published in that catalog. I don't know how, but it's as soon as we find out that Hope owned it, he's dead. And yet, weirdly, this is where the diamond gets its name from, the name that we still call it today, the Hope diamond. After Henry Philip Hope died, the diamond passed to his nephew, Henry Thomas Hope, who had a fairly normal life and death, and then on to his grandson, Lord Francis Hope, who was a duke. He was the Duke of Newcastle. Lord Francis had a bit of a wild life. In 1894, he married an American concert hall singer named May Yohe. Now I know it doesn't seem that crazy today, but this had to have been super scandalous at the time. An English duke marrying an American performer, a singer in the 1890s? My goodness, the tongues would have wagged. May claimed to have worn the Hope Diamond during special occasions, but Lord Francis maintained that she didn't wear it. We think she might have worn it on at least one occasion, though, but she wasn't wearing it all the time. Lord Francis and May lived well beyond their means, and they soon found themselves in financial trouble. We think Lord Francis may have had a bit of a gambling problem. And so because of this, they were forced to sell the Hope Diamond in 1901. Soon after that, May ran off with her lover, a guy named Putnam Strong, and so the couple divorced in 1902. Once again, so incredibly scandalous and really just unheard of for the time, especially among the nobility like this. Life really just went downhill after that. May got married a few more times, but she reportedly suffered from alcoholism, and all of these marriages failed. And she ended up alone and poor, dying at the age of 72. I'm not totally sure what happened to Lord Francis. I know that he lived to be 72 as well, and that he may or may not have lost a foot in a hunting accident. I don't know. But May would play a pretty big part, actually, in helping to create the legend of the cursed diamond, publicly announcing in 1921 that she believed the diamond was cursed and had ruined her life. But is it the diamond, or is it your incredibly poor life choices? TBD. So they sold the diamond in 1901, though. It ended up with a diamond dealer named Simon Frankel in New York, and so the Hope Diamond made its way to the United States. Now, Frankel had a hard time selling the Hope Diamond at first. He takes it out every once in a while to show it to rich Americans, but no one bites. No one wants to buy it from him. And he wasn't able to sell it until 1908, when he finally finds a buyer. He sells it to a wealthy Turkish diamond collector named Selim Habib for the equivalent of $14 million today. Pretty soon after, though, Selim falls into financial ruin and is forced to sell the diamond to a jewel merchant in Paris, who sells it to another guy named Pierre Cartier. Pierre came from a whole family, a dynasty, really, of jewelry makers. Cartier is still a high-end luxury goods brand today, but it was started in 1847 by Pierre's grandfather. Pierre Cartier takes the Hope Diamond to Washington, D.C. in 1910. He thinks he knows the perfect buyer for it. In Washington, D.C., there is one woman in particular, a socialite named Evelyn Walsh McLean, who might just be interested in something as gaudy and over-the-top as the Hope Diamond. It's one thing to wear something like this, as the Sun King in 17th century France. It's another thing altogether to wear it in 20th century America. But Cartier hopes Evelyn McLean will take the bait. She's certainly rich enough to afford the diamond anyway. Evelyn herself was a mining heiress. Her father, who started as an immigrant miner, struck gold, literally. He discovered a gold mine in 1898 and became a multimillionaire overnight when Evelyn was 12 years old. Her only other sibling, her brother, died young, and so Evelyn was the heiress to her father's whole gold fortune. Her husband, Edward Beale McLean, who went by Ned, inherited the Washington Post newspaper, which his grandfather had started. So we've got gold mine rich and newspaper rich coming together here. The McLeans were loaded, and Cartier knew it. Now he just needed to convince her to buy the Hope Diamond. Here's how he did that. Keeping the diamond hidden under a cloth, he began to tell Evelyn the riveting stories of its past. Stolen off a Hindu statue in India, the eye of a goddess, worn by the Sun King, Louis XIV, at the Palace of Versailles, stolen after the executions of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, owned by George IV, the next king of England. I mean, it's really a wild backstory. And Cartier didn't hold back any of the gruesome details. He played up the curse angle. He tells her about Tavernier stealing the diamond off the Hindu statue and later being torn to shreds by a pack of wild dogs. I'm not really sure how that helps sell a diamond, but apparently it does. It's notorious, it's infamous, it's a statement piece, and Evelyn McLean has to have it. But she doesn't actually like it in its current setting, so Cartier has it reset in the middle of a ring of white diamonds on a necklace made of still more diamonds, which is what it looked like at the Smithsonian Museum when I saw it years ago. He presents the new and improved diamond necklace to Evelyn McLean again. She likes it, but she's still not so sure. Honestly, the curse thing is kind of worrying her a little bit. So Cartier lets her keep it for the weekend. He's like, just hold on to it till Monday and then decide. And this marketing scheme works. After a weekend with the Hope Diamond, Evelyn McLean absolutely has to have it. And they purchase it from Cartier for a reported $10.1 million in today's money, after a lot of back and forth between their attorneys. Now, Marie Antoinette, we don't think, ever wore this thing. May Yohe seems to have worn it maybe once. Evelyn McLean wears the heck out of the Hope Diamond. Honestly, she wore it like super irresponsibly too. She wore it all over town to all kinds of social functions. She was known to put it around the neck of her dog, a Great Dane named Mike. She was also known to hide the necklace during social gatherings at her house and then challenge her guests to find it. And this isn't, I said house, but this is like this huge palatial mansion. But the McLeans weren't stupid. You know, this is a $10 million necklace. It did have protection. The New York Times reported in 1911, quote, William Schindel, a former Secret Service man, has been engaged to guard the stone. He, in turn, will be guarded by Leo Costello and Simeon Blake, private detectives. The stone will be kept at the McLean mansion during the day, and each night will be deposited in a safe deposit vault. When Mrs. McLean wears the gem at balls and receptions, arrangements have been made to keep the safe deposit building open until after the function, that the stone may be safely stored away. A special automobile has been purchased to convey the guards to and from the house to the trust company's building, end quote. So they bought a car and hired 3 guys to guard the Hope Diamond around the clock. Pretty wild. But what about the curse, right? The McLean lives seem pretty great so far. Well, disaster does strike pretty soon after purchasing the Hope Diamond in the form of a series of deaths. First, a close friend of the McLeans dies suddenly and mysteriously while on a yacht with them. Evelyn recorded in her autobiography later that she could do nothing but watch helplessly as her friend slipped away. Then her mother-in-law, Ned's mother, died of pneumonia. And after that, according to Evelyn in her autobiography, she took the Hope Diamond to a Catholic priest and had it blessed. And it seemed to work for a while. You know, the McLeans carried on tragedy-free for a few years there. But then in 1919, tragedy struck again in a big way. Their son, Vincent, was playing in the yard with some friends and ended up running out into the street. I don't know if he was like chasing a ball or he just like didn't look both ways. I don't know, but he was hit by a car. Now, at first, it seemed like Vincent was going to be okay. But then, over the course of the day, he became paralyzed and eventually died, probably of internal bleeding. This was obviously a huge blow to the McLean family, and they began to unravel. Ned McLean began drinking heavily and experiencing issues with his mental health. He began acting erratically and spending money super recklessly, which led to the forced sale of the Washington Post by trustees. He also began an extramarital relationship, which led Evelyn to file for divorce in 1931. Ned was eventually admitted to a psychiatric hospital where he died of a heart attack at the age of 52. And the same year that Ned died, the McLeans' 24-year-old daughter, Evie, met a terrible fate as well. She had married a 57-year-old senator from North Carolina when she was only 19 years old. becoming his fifth wife. Can't imagine that was a very happy marriage. But less than 5 years later, less than 5 years after they were married, Evelyn discovered her daughter dead of an apparent sleeping pill overdose. Evelyn herself would die at the age of 60 of pneumonia. The McLeans had other children, too, who didn't die early tragic deaths, but all of them had multiple marriages and divorces and just like these really tumultuous and unhappy lives. When Evelyn died in 1947, she bequeathed the Hope Diamond to her grandchildren. However, this was overturned, and trustees got permission to sell the diamond to pay off the McLeans' debts instead. They sold it to a New York diamond merchant named Harry Winston. Over the next few years, Winston toured around the United States, exhibiting the Hope Diamond as well as other jewels in his collection, before donating it to the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in 1958, where it has remained ever since. Y'all, Winston mailed it to the Smithsonian. He just popped it in a box and mailed it in, like, the mailbox. According to Wikipedia, quote, on November 10th, 1958, Winston acquiesced, sending it through U.S. mail in a box wrapped in brown paper as simple registered mail, insured for $1 million at a cost of $145.29, of which $2.44 was for postage and the balance insurance, end quote. Harry Winston died of a heart attack at the ripe old age of 83. So, I mean, there does seem to be a lot of tragedy following this diamond around when you start trying to look for a curse, right? But how much of it is just undeniably out of the ordinary, hard to explain curse stuff, and how much of it is just confirmation bias? It seems like in a lot of these cases, they're only looking at the bad. Oh, Louis XIV died a terrible, slow, agonizing death of gangrene. Yes, but what about all the good stuff? That's pretty much the only bad thing that happened to the man, and it was fairly common and expected death back then, right? Louis XV died a terrible, slow, agonizing death of smallpox. Same. Right? Same. May Yohe and the McLeans, they both got divorced and they dealt with substance abuse and mental health issues and financial ruin. Yeah, but what about all the other stuff? One was a famous musician married to an actual duke, and the other were dual heiress to multi-million-dollar inheritances. They lived in mansions and they had everything they could ever possibly want. So it's easy to see the curse when you only look at the bad stuff. But what about all the good stuff? And then we have to consider how much of the curse was actually just a publicity stunt. Marketing. We know Pierre Cartier used this sort of marketing to give the Hope Diamond this legendary, mythical appeal to get the McLeans to buy it, which worked. At the time he was attempting to sell it to them, the newspapers were publishing all kinds of crazy claims about the curse of the Hope Diamond, most of which I didn't even mention in this episode because they're just completely unsubstantiated. In 1908, the Washington Post published an article called "Hope Diamond Has Brought Trouble to All Who Have Owned It." In 1909, the British newspaper The Times reported, quote, "Its possession is the story of a long series of tragedies, murder, suicide, madness, and various other misfortunes," end quote. The New York Times had a field day with the Hope Diamond, reporting all kinds of crazy stuff for which there is no evidence. Some of these names are going to be unfamiliar to you because there isn't even any proof that some of these people existed. But here's just a few of the things the New York Times reported. They claimed that a guy named Jacques Collet bought the diamond from Simon Frankel and then committed suicide. Prince Ivan Kanatovsky bought it from Collet and then was killed by Russian revolutionaries. Kanatovsky loaned it to someone named Mille Ledoux, who was, quote, murdered by her sweetheart. Simon Mincharides, who had once sold it to the Turkish Sultan, was thrown from a precipice along with his wife and young child. A Turkish attendant named Hever Aga was hanged for having it in his possession. Jeweler William Falls, who had recut the stone after it was stolen from France, quote, died a ruined man. William Falls' son, Hendrik, stole the jewel from his father and later died by suicide. Some sources also say the son, Hendrik, killed his father when he stole the jewel and then later died by suicide. Newspapers also claimed that the diamond's Turkish owner, Salim Habib, had drowned in a shipwreck near Singapore, but that was actually a completely different person by the same name. The shipwreck happened, a guy by that name drowned, not the same guy, not the guy who owned the Hope Diamond. So they're not doing very well with the fact-checking, we know. All of this is coming out in the newspapers around the time that the McLeans bought the Hope Diamond. Some of it was probably spurred on by Pierre Cartier's marketing tactics, but also remember that the McLeans themselves owned the Washington Post. They were newspaper people. There's a good chance that a lot of this curse talk and these unsubstantiated claims coming out in the newspapers around the time that the McLeans bought the diamond were all just a huge publicity stunt. Why would the McLeans want the world to think the diamond was cursed? For the same reason expert diamond salesman Pierre Cartier wanted the McLeans to think the diamond was cursed. It increases the allure and the intrigue, which increases the value of the stone itself. The McLeans bought the Hope Diamond for something like $10.1 million in today's money. Today, it's worth between $200 and $350 million. So, I think we can say the publicity stunt worked. Then you have May Yohe coming out in 1921 as a former owner claiming the diamond was cursed. What does she have to gain from that? She doesn't own it anymore. Well, May Yohe's life had completely fallen apart by 1921. She left her Duke husband for a series of failed relationships and ended up living an alcoholic in poverty. She made terrible decisions. She doesn't want to take responsibility for ruining her own life. It's so much easier to blame a curse. It wasn't May Yohe's fault. It was the curse of the Hope Diamond. It becomes a convenient excuse. Evelyn McLean can lean into the curse as well when her life starts to fall apart. It frees them of the weight of any fault in the matter of their own lives. And so, do I think the curse of the Hope Diamond is real? No, I really don't. That'd be kind of fun, but no, I don't think it's cursed. I think specific details of its history have been taken out of context, and others have been completely fabricated to sell newspapers and hype up the value of the diamond. I think former owners like May Yohe and Evelyn McLean jumped on board with the curse idea because it freed them of any wrongdoing or guilt. They were not responsible for the bad things that happened to them. But it is remarkable how many bad things happened to former owners of the Hope Diamond. We have the French Revolution and the brutal executions of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. We have the financial ruin and infidelity of Lord Francis and May Yohe, the utter destruction of this noble family. And then we have a series of tragic deaths, infidelity, and mental illness plaguing the McLean family and leading to their ruin. It really is remarkable the level of tragedy and destruction that seemed to befall former owners of the Hope Diamond. But I think we have to consider the type of person who would own a diamond like that in the first place. I think if there's anything to be learned from this story, it's not that the Hope Diamond was cursed. It's that the fame, wealth, nobility, greatness, being on the top, reaching this upper echelon of society, that does not, in most cases, bring happiness. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I hope you found this story interesting and maybe you even learned something new. Be sure to follow my Instagram @HistoryFixPodcast to see some images that go along with this episode and to stay on top of new episodes as they drop. I'd also really appreciate it if you would rate and follow History Fix on whatever app you're using to listen and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about it. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix. Information used in this episode was sourced from the Smithsonian, Chateau de Versailles, Wikipedia, the National Institute of Demographics, and a So Supernatural podcast episode called The Curse of the Hope Diamond. As always, links to these sources can be found in the show notes.